Hi, I'm Professor Rodgir, Dr. Rodgir Cohen, and here I'm with you today wanting to discuss the housing market in California, problems with its function in the housing market here in California. The data we'll look at today is primarily focused on 2022 and earlier, and this lecture is delivered in 2023. The housing market crisis in California is at a pinnacle point at this time. In recent years, housing affordability has become a major political problem in California because of the significant price growth in many urban regions. At the state level, housing prices have risen faster than inflation for the last 2 decades. In spite of having only 12% of the United States population, California today has 27% also of the country's homeless population, all living within California. According to a 2018 survey by the Turner Center for Housing Innovation at the University of California, Berkeley, 94% of residential land in San Jose is zoned for single-family homes. Single-family housing can account for 60% or more of the residential zoning in some of the large metro areas like Los Angeles. At least 95% of the land in Atherton, a wealthy Bay Area town, is set aside for single-family homes as well. Overall, about 80% of the homes in the state's residential areas are single-family dwellings. However, high-density housing, which can save money on scarce urban land, is prevented as a result of many local and state policies. Recently, we have witnessed increasing interest in using state legislation to circumvent local zoning rules and alter single-family zoned areas. As a result of California Senate Bill 35, which passed in 2017, local governments and counties that failed to meet the number of housing units assigned to them by the Regional Planning Authority were subject to ministerial approval processes. As a number of proposals have been filed in the state assembly to rezone single-family neighborhoods to accommodate multifamily dwellings as well as apartments. Despite this, these reforms have not yet been implemented, likely because the considerable political pressure exerted against them by the opponents to these modifications and changes. The conversion of industrial, retail, and commercial buildings into residential and mixed-use space would also be a simpler zoning change to achieve. It is no accident that COVID-19 epidemic accelerated trends that were already underway. Duplex and triplex units fit more readily into a single-family home's constructed environment than bigger apartment complexes. Therefore, opponents of the SB 50 would be denied one of their greatest arguments by separating them from the more problematic multifamily portion of the bill. SB 1120 or 1120 would have permitted duplexes in a single family zones in 2020, but was defeated by the state Senate. So as you can see, we have many different issues with housing and politics. And the next assembly sessions coming up, we need to start looking at redressing these problems we have with zoning changes that don't allow for equitable living or equitable housing areas for people to have affordability. The climate change and policies surrounding climate change have impacted and also led to our zoning issues for housing affordability. The incentives and behavior of market participants like families, local and municipal governments, developers, landlords, and so on will be affected by any new legislation that's passed. As a cautionary tale, the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA, shows how a law that was intended to mitigate the effects of climate change may instead be used as a weapon to thwart climate-friendly infrastructure projects. So we have a problem right now where our property development is being thwarted or changed, and under the guise of Clean Air Acts or Environmental Quality Acts are changing and stopping the development of zoning restrictions within local municipalities. So in order to proceed with a project, they'll have a detrimental impact on the environment. The CEQA requires that harm be minimized. Projects may be rejected if a more environmentally friendly option is available. And what ends up happening over a long period of time is local municipalities may drag out the environmental report for way too long, causing the changes to our zoning restrictions to be implemented or allowed. California has a wide range of state legislation aimed at protecting the environment, but the effects on land use and housing construction patterns are particularly complex. At the first state legislation of its type, the California Environmental Quality Act aimed to provide policymakers and the public about negative environmental repercussions of large projects. Reforming the CEQA is critical since lawsuits, in particular, are routinely employed by groups seeking to delay or prevent development for a number of reasons, many of which have nothing to do with environmental concerns. We have many considerations that we should be looking at for the housing crisis. If serious changes are not implemented, the housing crisis in California will intensify, and the gap between the relatively well-off and the poor will increase. Families with school-age children, especially those in the middle of the social economic spectrum, will have to move out of California, leaving the state mostly to wealthy families able to bear the state's relatively high housing costs. So, in conclusion, in order to hedge discriminatory practices in housing, policymakers should aim towards housing outcomes such as increased housing production and greater affordability, rather than focus on narrowly interpreted rules-based approaches. To answer California's housing affordability dilemma is to build a regulatory framework that strikes a balance between growth, housing affordability, and development sustainability, while also protecting the environment. Because of overlapping regulations, building codes, historic preservation, zoning, environmental rules, etc., housing production is impacted by a wide range of specialized rules in California. To prevent undesirable growth, local governments and communities might utilize a variety of tactics, including apartment bans, huge minimum lot sizes, or discretionary approval processes that might limit having higher density housing put into communities that will increase supply and also increase affordability. I look forward to a day when more people can have home ownership in California and where equitable housing is available for all people. I look forward to the time we can talk about it and say that California has opened up the free market system and allowed more people to enter into the privilege of home ownership and not being subject to high rental costs and the fear of having to leave the state of California. Thank you for tuning in today. Look forward to our next class together.